5,
4,
3,
2,
1. But who's counting, right?
And his name is Major.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Please welcome Major Garrett.
from the nation's capital,
Major, fantastic.
it's The Takeout.
This is a major achievement.
With CBS News Chief Washington Correspondent,
Major Garrett, yes, CBS, yes, hi.
Major Garrett.
Major, that's nonsense, and you should know better.
Is Major out of the doghouse?
The answer is yes.
Welcome to the very best part of my broadcast week. You know, ladies and gentlemen, there are times when the location where we shoot this show and the guest really mesh. And I'm happy to say that's exactly what's happening this week. Ben's Chili Bowl is a very famous restaurant in Washington, D.C. It's an institutional restaurant. It's full of resilience. It's deeply embedded in the community of Washington, D.C. And I've always wanted to bring the show here, but I didn't want to come here just Major coming in to Ben's Chili Bowl. I wanted to come here when someone who had a real lived experience at Ben's Chili Bowl was important to them and their actual lives, not just Major hanging out trying to gain some sort of rep from Ben's Chili Bowl. So that's why I'm so glad Ayanna Pressley is with us. She's a congresswoman from the 7th District of Massachusetts. Ayanna, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
It's good to be with you, Major.
Tell me about your experience in Ben's Chili Bowl.
Oh, so many. So first, prior to my election to Congress, and even prior to my election on the Boston City Council, I was an aide for 16 years, 4 in the House for former Congressman Joseph P. Kennedy II, and 11 with United States Senator John Kerry. And so when I was an aide on the Hill in my 20s, I mean, of course, we worked very hard, but every now and then we would have a respite and allow ourselves to exhale after a hard week, and Ben's is where we would come. And I'm personally obsessed with their strawberry cake. I know people come for the half smokes and the chili.
Yep.
But I'm a cake connoisseur. That's my thing. So I love the strawberry cake. But also it's important. If Black lives really are to matter, then Black wealth must matter. Black joy must matter. Black culture must matter. And all of that is representative and manifest here in the walls of Ben's. I think it's now 85 plus years that their doors have been open, multiple locations, a Black family-owned business founded by the Ali family. And as a legislator, because I have my own personal connection in hospitality, having worked in waitstaff for a number of years, I'm very passionate about the role of food and that it plays in building community. And
We're passionate about food here at the Takeout, let me tell you, for sure.
And also, restaurants are just critical social and economic anchors. And so it's great to be here in this institution. This is about Black history, Black pride, Black resilience, but again, economic justice, Black wealth. And that's something that I organize, mobilize, and legislate on every single day.
And just so you understand, ladies and gentlemen, we're at a satellite location of Ben's Chili Bowl. There's a very famous location on U Street, part of the U Street corridor in Washington, D.C. And one of the things that's most important about Ben's Chili Bowl's history is during the catastrophic riots in Washington, D.C. in 1968, it was one of the few businesses along the U Street corridor, A, that stayed open, and B, this is very poignant, sold to Black residents traumatized by the riots and the white police and firefighters who were dealing with the effects of the riots. They all came to Ben's. And that was a symbol then, it's a symbol now.
That's right.
Of what can be achieved, what can happen in times of crisis, and how people can still come together. And that's why Ben's is resonant in this city and why I'm so happy to be here. And I guarantee you we will take this show to the famous U Street corridor stop in the near term. Congresswoman Pressley is a member of the squad. I want to ask her what she thinks about that, if that's a term she embraces. She's also been described as a progressive institutionalist. So let's break those down. The squad and progressive institutionalist. Do you embrace either or both of those?
Well, in my opinion and definition of the squad is big.
Right.
It is certainly bigger than any handful of progressive members of Congress, mostly women of color, progressive members of Congress. Is anyone doing the work of building a more equitable and just society? So the squad is big.
It's not just the four.
Absolutely not.
Okay.
And it actually, just a quick backstory on that. Myself, Representative Ocasio-Cortez, Representative Omar, and Tlaib, each of us represented historic firsts. I'm the first person of color to represent the the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in the House of Representatives in its 230-year history. And so each of us represented a historic first. And so we had been asked to do an interview because we were each first.
Right.
And at the end of that interview, and this was our first time meeting one another, it was at freshman orientation for the Congressional Progressive Caucus. We took a photo, and we just hashtagged it, squad goals or something like that, and it went viral. And I think the reason why it went viral is because it was a deeply resonant sort of political and cultural inflection point. It was a signal of progress. Historically, we have been underrepresented as women and people of color representing marginalized communities in the corridors of power and around policy and decision-making tables. And so, again, the squad is big, but that's where that name came from. It was just we used it in that one hashtag, and it went viral because it did speak to so many people.
And let's be honest, in some places in America that was celebrated and embraced, and other places of America that was regarded as something threatening and troublesome and possibly irritating, right?
Look, I was a black girl, but I've been a black woman for most of my life.
Right.
And so I'm used to identity and representation being weaponized. This representation having made greater strides in leadership parity in the halls of government. And of course, we do have unprecedented representation right now, but we still don't have parity. And that's a disservice to everyone. So any strides that we make in having a more representative government benefits everyone. If ideas are being championed, if solutions are being developed through a completely monolithic and homogenized prism, it's to a disservice to everyone. We need a diversity of perspective, opinion, and thought in government. And so I think this is something to be celebrated, but again, it's not a new phenomenon that people would seek to weaponize identity.
And as the saying goes, and I know you've heard this, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
That's right. Yes, that's right.
And being at the table changes things.
Absolutely, it does. I mean, to me, that's the true benefit of having a representative government. And that
was your experience on the Boston City Council.
Absolutely.
Your arrival and the agendas and the items you brought there changed the way the City Council functioned.
Well, that's generous.
I mean, based on my reading of it.
That's generous, but what I will say is being a woman of color, first black woman to serve on the Boston City Council when I was elected in 2009. And in fact, that was I had broken a 100-year-old ceiling in that regard. There's a professor who previously was on a part of the faculty at UMass Boston, Dr. Carol Hardy-Fanta, and she said, when women of color break electoral ceilings, they're not glass, they're concrete. So I broke that concrete ceiling in 2009, and I think the best way to show the impact of that victory is in our first budget cycle. Every agency and department that came before me, since I had run on a platform of championing gender-specific and responsive programming and policies, I asked them about the girls. And their answers were really monosyllabic. But by the second budget cycle, they came with cross-tab, multicolored binders because they knew someone would call the question. Right. And that is the true power of a representative government.
And you developed an alliance with Michelle Wu, who's now the mayor of Boston.
Well, let me just say something about the City Council, of which I had the honor of serving for nearly a decade. That City Council has produced a historic mayor in Michelle Wu, an attorney general in Andrea Campbell, and our second black female state senator in Lydia Edwards, and myself as a member of Congress. So yes, it was Michelle. I think it would not be fair to characterize her as a mentee. She might say that, but we're all very proud of her. And of course, Boston at this point has a long history of folks originally from Chicago coming and advancing progressive change. And Deval Patrick, myself, and Michelle Wu, respectively.
We'll get to that Chicago part and the Cincinnati part of your story when we come back. I'm Major Garrett. Segment 2 of the Takeout coming your way in just 1 minute.
You know, what I want to do is legislate equity, legislate healing, and legislate justice, and I do believe it's possible.
From CBS News, this is The Takeout with Major Garrett.
Welcome back. Ayanna Pressley is our special guest, Congresswoman 7th District of Massachusetts. If you know anything about that, Tip O'Neill used to represent a good portion of what is now the 7th District. A little bit of footnote there.
Yeah.
Born in Cincinnati, spent time in Chicago. There are aspects of your childhood that have been described in biographies as troubled, yet you were also a cheerleader, a voice model, debating champion or successful high school debater. Tell my audience a little bit about both the highs and lows of your childhood and how it informs your view of politics and what to do in positions of power.
Sure. Well, you know, a child's first teacher is their parent, or are their parents. And I had two extraordinary teachers, and both of my parents, it has formidably shaped me. And my mother, I mean, one of the things I appreciate the most, having growing up in a single-parent home and being an only child, is that I saw my mother's humanity. I saw her as a woman. And not singularly as my parent. You know, most children don't have that experience until they're adult children, but it was sort of my mother and I versus the world. And so here I saw this brilliant black woman who would train men that were often promoted over her and paid more. I saw my mother have to leave me at home as a latchkey kid at a very young age. I'm always fearful that she could get in trouble for that, but she couldn't afford childcare. I saw my mother have her medical pain dismissed or delegitimized because there was often a lack of cultural competency and humility when she would be, you know, seeking health care. I saw my mother go back to work long before she should have after a medical procedure because she didn't have paid leave. And so because I had these situations, seeing my mother's humanity as a woman, that was an incredible education. But also in her forthrightness as one of my first teachers, she said to me, Ayanna, to be black is a beautiful thing and something to be proud of, but you have been born into a struggle. And I have an expectation that you will do your part in the work of liberation of black people and all marginalized people. Now, sort of a heavy head trip, right? I was probably 8 years old, but like I said, it was my mother and I versus the world. She never condescended me. She never patronized me. And so that really
So you had
set something in
the
me.
day-to-day struggle, you and your mom, and then the larger struggle she was trying to communicate to you.
The larger struggle she was communicating to me, and I do want to also acknowledge the contributions of my father as my teacher as well. Although my father, for a period of his life, had, like millions of Americans, struggled with substance use disorder and addiction and was in the throes of that. And because of that, he was in and out of the criminal legal system during my formative years.
Incarcerated.
Yes, but he wrote me faithfully. He sent me the literary works of James Baldwin and Langston Hughes and Lorraine Hansberry and Gwendolyn Brooks. And so he really formidably shaped my black consciousness as well.
And then later in life bounced back.
Yes, he did. And so having the experience of a loved one, a parent in particular, being incarcerated those many years, of course it was destabilizing. There was a lot of shame and stigma that I carried with that. And so that experience has really also informed the work that I do in that space to ensure that substance use disorder is not criminalized, that mental health, homelessness, poverty is not criminalized, and also to legislate in a way to support the successful reentry, whether it's housing justice, wraparound services and supports, family reunification. My father, who I'm so very proud of, and I do want to name both my parents. My mother's name is Sandy. May she rest in peace and power. My father's name is Martin, and he went on to attain many advanced degrees and to become a college professor and a published author. So I'm very proud of him. So I think, you know, in summary, my lived experience is that of everyone else. It's intersectional, it's complex, it's nuanced, and I bring the totality and the confluence of my experiences, both personally and professionally, to this work.
And when you encounter someone who might say all these things you say about rebalancing or equity, politics is a zero-sum game. You gain, mean I lose. What would you say to that?
That's not true. Unfortunately, we do have very much a cultural mindset of scarcity. And so there become these hierarchies of hurt that are perpetuated, or this sort of psychology that there's this pie and there's only so much to go around. But it's been my experience as someone who's been organizing and in the work of electoral politics since the age of 10, and professionally since the age of 19. Again, an aide for 16 years, 4 in the House, 11 in the Senate, a city councilor for 8, and now 4 years in Congress, that we don't suffer from a deficit of resource. Of course, you saw during the pandemic, there were many things that government stepped in to do that for decades we've said we did not have the resource to do. So it's not a deficit of resource, but I do believe that there is a deficit of empathy, and that is certainly something that I'm seeking to change, is that instead of a politic of transaction, that we usher in a politic of transformation. And finally, I would say the struggles that my mother and I experienced, that she was struggling to make ends meet, raising me alone. For a number of years, I thought that we were marked in some kind of way. It seemed that everyone I knew and that was proximate to me in my community was having the same struggles, and I thought we were just marked. But upon greater education, I realized that we were in the residual aftermath of the war on drugs, experiencing the policy violence, very precise violence of things like redlining. And so in the residual aftermath of welfare reform, all of these things. And so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to be in Washington, because I came to realize that every inequity, every disparity, every racial injustice is one that was legislated or codified in a budget. And most of that started in federal policy.
And then it trickles down.
Exactly. And so if we know what it is to live in a present or in the aftermath of legislated hurt and harm, what I want to do is legislate equity, legislate healing, and legislate justice. And I do believe it's possible.
There were, as you mentioned, a lot of interventions during the pandemic that people said couldn't be done, but were done. But many of them are on the wane or gone. How does that strike you, and what does that tell you about their ability to come back, or the necessity or the need for them to come back?
I think that in the immediate aftermath, there's a bit of selective amnesia here, because at the height of the most high-profile instances of police brutality against Black Americans, Black men in particular, against the backdrop of a pandemic that was hitting the most marginalized communities the hardest, because of decades of unjust budgets, of proximity to emissions, unequal access to health care, I mean, you name it. They said that we were in the midst of a racial reckoning. And I take issue with that. Because
you don't like that phrase?
Well, I've seen no evidence of it. I grew up in my grandfather's storefront church on the south side of Chicago. And so
reckoning means something deeper, and that
something
depth hasn't
deep,
been achieved.
That's commiserate to the hurt and harm that has been caused, really for centuries. And so everyone spoke about the fact that the pandemic had shown a light on and exacerbated every injustice and disparity. And so now on the other side of that, so what are we going to do about it? We can't just default to an unjust status quo. And so many of those things...
Go back to normal.
We can't, no. If people aren't clear after a pandemic about how important childcare is, that is not a gender issue, that is a family issue, that is a workforce issue. Childcare is as much about our families as it is about the GDP.
Right. And who's the frontline worker and why, and what are they subjected to, and what are the risks, and what are the rewards?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Or.
But do you sense that impetus is receding, and the awareness and appreciation of that time is receding? And if so, do you worry about that?
Of course I worry about it. And it's why, I continue to move with deliberate urgency. And I remain so squarely focused on policy because it is my love language. It's not just a T-shirt, though I do sell it. But policy is my love language, and so I believe that is the way to undo centuries of harm, but also to chart a more equitable path forward. And that's why I have taken on in earnest so stridently issues like student debt cancellation, because that is a racial justice issue.
And we will get to that in just a minute because we love policy on this show. I've never described it as our Takeout love language, but it's pretty close. Segment 3 of the Takeout coming your way in just a second.
Although there have been gains made by Black Americans, including in my own family, we've grown income but not wealth.
From CBS News, this is The Takeout with Major Garrett.
Welcome back to the Takeout. Welcome back to Ben's Chili Bowl. Ayanna Pressley, Congresswoman from the 7th District of Massachusetts, our guest. Ben's Chili Bowl is famous for its half-smokes and its chilies, and having just polished mine off camera, because I'm not stupid, deservedly so. The fame precedes it and will always continue at Ben's Chili Bowl. So, as we went to break, you were talking about student loans. I was outside the Supreme Court very recently when Supreme Court struck down President Biden's effort to forgive student loan forgiveness. Your evaluation of, A, that decision, and what President Biden announced thereafter, a sort of plan B to try to remedy what the Supreme Court did.
Well, let me take it back a little bit. Recently, I've asked people I want people to just call me Ayanna, first off. But if they do want to address me with my title, I would rather be called a representative than a congresswoman. Because that is what I really seek to be, is a true representative of my district, and then to advance responsive solutions to their hurt, but also to advance solutions that meet their needs but advance their dreams. Student debt cancellation is an issue that when it was first sort of introduced into the lexicon, people really tried to marginalize it and fringe it. People questioned whether or not the president had authority. They questioned whether or not student debt cancellation would be regressive in impact and only benefit affluent white graduate students, ostensibly.
Many Republicans said exactly that.
Sure, I know
Why should we bail out white graduate students?
Yeah. Well, those were harmful mischaracterizations and an inaccurate narrative. And so for 2 years, despite all those naysayers and those efforts to really marginalize the issue, because I want to be a representative, we were in communication and conversation and dialogue. And I've carried those stories with me.
With the White House. And
to the White House.
Yes.
I mean, senior citizens, elders on Social Security and fixed incomes who cried to me, I'm going to die still paying on these loans. I owe more now than I took out. A 76-year-old constituent whose benefits had been garnished because they defaulted on those loans and we're still paying them. Young families struggling to pay child care. Massachusetts is the 3rd highest cost of child care in the country. We're working on it. But again, we don't have universal child care as a country. So young families struggling to meet child care costs, to pay for rent. Black and brown borrowers disproportionately burdened by this nearly $2 trillion crisis. It's very much a racial justice issue. If you look at Black Americans specifically, we've been locked out of every major federal relief program in this country. From the Homestead Act to the GI Bill, targeted by redlining. And so although there have been gains made by Black Americans, including in my own family, we've grown income but not wealth. And so Black and brown students borrow and default at higher rates. And then finally,
I interviewed, as a part of my coverage of this story, a young man who had just graduated from Howard. He had 3 siblings. All of them had taken out student loan debt, who said exactly that. We have to take out loans because that's how we get into college. That's how we get to the next rung. And to place our feet on that ladder higher, we need to take out some debt to do it.
That's right. And when you talk about that rung, we purport that this is a meritocracy. And in that meritocracy, that education is the great equalizer. But we know that has only been pulled farther and farther out of reach. And so we worked for 2 years to make the case, to show the face of this crisis, to build this coalition of grassroots borrowers, civil rights organizations, labor union presidents. And the president was responsive to that coalition and used executive action. And the reason we were pushing for executive action is not only because he had multiple mechanisms and the legal authority to do it, but is because we knew it would be the most effective, efficient, and impactful way to bring about this transformative relief. And so the president acted, and I vehemently disagree with the ruling by the Supreme Court. I think it is tone deaf. I think it is callous. I think it is not in keeping with the will of the majority of the people. And moreover, as we have found increasingly so with the Supreme Court, unprecedented has been the word du jour, and not for the right reasons. They continue to make history for all the wrong reasons. They are legislating from the bench. And so President Biden's executive action, which, again, I wish the Supreme Court would have just applied the law because the legal case was sound there, would grant relief for some 43 million Americans burdened by this debt. And immediately after the action, myself and Senator Warren went on a road trip. She played Patsy Cline. I pushed for New Edition. To make sure that
nice breakdown.
To make sure that all eligible borrowers signed up. And so in very short order, some 26 million people signed up for this transformative relief. And 16 million have already been approved. And the executive action that the president signed with the stroke of a pen would have provided relief.
None received anything because it was blocked in the courts almost immediately.
But what it would have
done... But they had
done...
an anticipation.
Exactly. And what it would have done was grant relief for Pell Grant recipients up to $20,000, and for non-Pell Grant recipients, $10,000. And so I disagree with the Supreme Court ruling. President Biden still needs to deliver this transformative relief. It is very consequential. There is a great financial panic for borrowers, particularly with payments set to resume
October 1st.
In the fall.
Yep.
That was another thing that we had fought for during the pandemic, was a pause on those payments. And we heard from families about...
pause set in motion, we should remind our listeners and viewers, by President Trump.
Correct.
And extended by President Biden.
That is also correct. And I think the point here is it's deeply consequential. Again, you're talking about a $2 trillion crisis. And so when we spoke to people who had benefited from that pause, some people became first-generation homeowners. Some people were able to remain safely housed, purchase essential goods. So we know how impactful that pause has been. And there's financial panic about those payments resuming. And so what I'm calling on, and I do thank Secretary Cardona and President Biden for coming out and responding quickly and speaking to borrowers and letting them know this fight is not over. It's very important that we move swiftly in that fight, and that the response is one that is felt. And that is why I'm still calling on them to deliver this relief at $20,000 for Pell Grant recipients and $10,000 for non-Pell Grant recipients, because it's just deeply consequential. And moreover, we know the Supreme Court, which have been enlisted as co-conspirators in this far-right extremist agenda from the lower courts to the Supreme Court, to the highest court, that the other reason that they obstructed this is political reasons. Not only is this relief deeply needed and long overdue, it is very popular. It was a motivating issue in the midterms, along with reproductive justice, bodily autonomy, and freedom. This was a motivating issue to the poll. And so this relief is sorely needed, and it is also very popular. And so I'm calling on President Biden and Secretary Cardona to deliver the relief to the coalition that delivered them to the White House.
Do you think the president will receive credit for trying or blame for failing on this issue?
Well, we're elected officials, and so, those things cut both ways. But
I mean, for this coalition you're talking about, does he get credit for trying and blocked by the Supreme Court? And what's the politics?
Democrats get credit when we deliver. When people know what we're doing, not because they read a press release, but because they feel it. And that's on things like the child tax credit or this transformative student debt relief, which I am still calling on the White House to deliver on, because a promise is a promise.
And if it's undelivered, then it will end badly politically.
I think the most important thing is not about what the impact will be politically. I think the most important thing is the catastrophic impact that this will have on families and communities and our economy, because the promise of all of us is being choked by this nearly $2 trillion crisis. People from every walk of life.
And real quickly, for those who say, I paid
But
my
yes,
student...
there will be political implications
Right.
as well,
For those
I
who would
believe.
say, and I'll let you answer this on the other side of the break, so I'll just set the question up and then we'll go to break. For those who would say, hey, I paid off my student debt, why should someone else get a benefit because I was frugal enough or I was well-positioned enough? I'm going to let that question sit out there. Ayanna Pressley is our special guest, representative of Massachusetts' 7th Congressional District. I will remember
Let's
that
go.
henceforth. Segment 4 of the Takeout coming your way in just a second.
I took out loans. I defaulted on those loans. It took me 20 plus years to pay those loans back, and yet I still have been on the front lines of this fight.
From CBS News, this is The Takeout with Major Garrett.
Welcome back. Representative Pressley is with us. Answer the question I posed to you. What about those who say, hey, I paid it off? Why is
Major.
someone else getting a break?
Major, you ready for this? I took out loans. I defaulted on those loans. It took me 20 plus years to pay those loans back, and yet I still have been on the front lines of this fight. First, we should always want better for the next generation. And as a lawmaker, my job is to solve problems. You know, and this is a very serious, burdensome problem, again, affecting people from every walk of life. And then finally, usually people are offering a comparison that is not an apples to apples comparison. It's not even apples to oranges. Again, you can't say we live in a meritocracy, education is life's great equalizer, when we have put that further and further out of reach. And so we have to be dual track here. Yes, we have to expand Pell Grants. We have to invest in HBCUs. We have to invest in vocational education. And we need to cancel student debt. We need to offer real relief. And notice, I've never called it forgiveness. And the reason why I've never called it forgiveness is because borrowers have only done what we've told them that they need to do in order to have social and economic mobility in this society. You have got to pursue higher education. Meritocracy, education's the equalizer. So I don't call it forgiveness because borrowers have done nothing wrong and they need to
don't
be
need to be
forgiven
right.
anything, but they are in need of and do deserve transformative relief.
I want to ask you a couple of political questions, then we'll get back to the Supreme Court. So,
Okay.
politically, evaluate President Biden's reelection campaign so far.
I think that the president has made a compelling case, a compelling legislated case. I mean, despite the landscape of Washington at this time, and immediately prior to that, during the pandemic, I mean, look, I said unprecedented has been the word du jour for the last 4 years, at an unprecedented time. Where we were experiencing challenges unlike anything amidst of a pandemic and all the ways in which it disrupted our economy and quality of life, he met the moment. And the fact that we have been able to advance really impactful legislation like the Inflation Reduction Act, CHIPS legislation. So I think,
But to your earlier
I think he's made a
observation,
compelling
people need to
case.
feel that.
But our work isn't done. And I tell you what, I know what my chances are in a Biden-Harris administration because this Republican, governing under this Republican majority in the House, it is clear to me that chaos is not the symptom, it is the strategy. And they definitely continue to advance what I would characterize as policy violence in their anti-abortion legislation. They are anti-woman, they're anti-worker, they're anti-immigrant. My Republican colleagues, I think, make the affirmative case for Democrats every single day with a very cruel, callous, and clueless way, an ineffective way with which they have been governing. So I think the Biden-Harris administration makes a compelling case, but we have more work to do. We still need paid leave. We need to make the child tax credit permanent. We still need universal child care. So there is still work to be done.
Any doubt in your mind that President Biden will be the Democratic nominee in 2024?
No.
Okay. Evaluate Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s run for the nomination.
Come on, Major. I mean,
Is it serious?
let me say this. Where I swallow my French fry here. In all seriousness, look, this is a democracy. I'm supportive of, it takes a lot of courage to put yourself out there. So it's up to every candidate
But
to put forward
there
a
are-
salient vision and to make their case to the electorate.
Let me be
And
more
so-
precise. There are plenty of Democrats who believe that he is a chaos agent backed by Republicans who want to cause trouble for the president. Do you agree with that?
Listen, I won't get into conspiracy theories and I won't speculate in that way. I'm no pundit. All I can tell you is that I do believe that Joe Biden will be the Democratic nominee. And I'm focused for the rest of this session in making the affirmative case for Democrats. And again, we make that case when we deliver, not when the electorate knows what we do based on a press release, but when they can feel the impact of our advocacy on their behalf.
How about Cornel West's third-party run?
I respect, Dr. West. We've shared many stages.
I'm sure you have. I'm sure you have.
And again,
But lots of Democrats fear any third-party candidacy siphons votes from the president, makes it more jeopardizing for him, hurts his prospects.
I'm no pundit.
But you're in the arena.
Love
But you're
language. I'm a
in the
lawmaker.
arena.
And that's what I remain squarely focused on. And, every candidate will have their opportunity to make the case to the electorate.
How about No Labels, which doesn't have a candidate, but is this shadow organization trying to put a dream ticket third-party thing together? A lot of Democrats are concerned about that. Are you?
What I'm focused on is the Democrats making the affirmative case and people feeling the impact of our advocacy on their behalf. What I want is for people to feel seen. I've been, again, working in electoral politics since the age of 10 years old. I've been a proud Democrat my entire life. And because I'm a proud Democrat, that means I fight hard to make sure that all the values we espouse, that we actually practice. And so there's still a lot of work that we need to do. I make it a point to door knock, to engage, to do the work of mobilization, not just in an election cycle. And that's what the Democrats have to do as well. We can't just engage people from a dynamic of transaction. Before I ask anyone for their vote, I'm asking them about their lives. And so I think it's important that every person feels seen, they feel centered, and that we are advancing solutions that are responsive to their needs.
Is this Supreme Court, as currently constituted, legitimate?
The Supreme Court right now is far right, extreme, and imbalanced. The good news is there are things that we can do to restore balance,
Is it ethical?
fairness, and integrity. I think that there are a lot of ethical things in question by more than one justice. When you're talking about moneyed interests, influencing decisions, unethical business transactions. I do think that we need a binding ethics code of conduct. I think we need reform, and I think we need expansion. And again, this is one of those ideas that, just like student debt cancellation to some, seemed marginal and unlikely. But there is precedent for this. Congress has expanded the courts 6 times before. And so I'm a part of a growing coalition of groups representing the most marginalized who have been the most harmed by the Supreme Court, a just majority, to build consensus and educate the masses about this.
How much larger does it need to be?
Well, we're bandying about, different things there. But I think at the end of the day, just by expansion, we will see greater balance and fairness. But then legislatively, we do need a binding code of ethics to restore the integrity of the courts. Right now, they're legislating from the bench. They are operating like some super legislature that has not been, but that's not accountable to the people because of these lifetime appointments. So I think everything needs to be on the table, from ethics guidelines to term limits to reform and expansion.
That is the voice of Ayanna Pressley, representative of the 7th District of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
That's right.
So concludes the Takeout. Stay tuned for your Takeout Outtake Especial.
My heart lives with R&B, okay, particularly 90s R&B.
From CBS News, this is The Takeout with Major Garrett.
Welcome to your Takeout Outtake Especial. Welcome to Ben's Chili Bowl. H Street corridor. We'll get to the U Street one and all of its famous historical resonance in D.C. in due course, I promise you. Ayanna Pressley, representative of 7th District of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, is our special guest. So, because you worked on the Hill, because you worked for a member of the House and a member of the Senate, I've known many people who have done that work. Some who have run for office and succeeded, some who have run for office and failed. When you were in that House office or that Senate office, did you think the work was easier than it actually was? Did you have a sense that I could do this, and it would, if only I was in there, I could do? Because I'm just curious what your orientation was to what you thought the difficulty and that learning curve was when you were an aide as compared to being the person herself.
It was an incredible tutelage to be proximate to Congressman Kennedy, Joseph P. Kennedy II, and Senator Kerry, respectively. But I will say, being on the other side, I had not a clue. Not at all.
There's a lot more.
There's a lot more. And in fact, when I served on the Oversight Committee in my freshman term, Secretary Kerry came before the committee and before he began his testimony, and of course we're still very much in touch. He's sort of a political dad to me, and before he began his testimony I said, I just would like to take a moment to say I apologize, because I was his scheduler for 7 years, and so and we had a great laugh in that moment. So it was a great education, but of course there were a lot of blind spots and things I never could have anticipated now actually being the member. But I also never would have thought I would have been a member. I did not think that was the path my life was going. I really enjoyed being the person behind the person, and actually that's something that I really a champion is for people that want to be politically involved. Your options are not just to vote or to run for office. There are very rewarding and meaningful opportunities at every level, and I loved being an aide.
How did you make that transition from behind to in front? It had to be a journey.
It was a journey, and I was also recruited.
But did you find things within yourself you weren't sure existed?
Absolutely. I've summoned things deep within. I don't want to say that I'm resilient, because I do think that resilience can sometimes be overrated and romanticized. Resilience comes from great hardship. But what I do know is that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm a deeply spiritual person, and believe in alignments, and my faith guides me in this work, and I believe I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. Now, my mother, may she rest in peace and power, was the one person who would not be surprised by where I am, because she proclaimed since I was born in the month of February that I was meant to make Black history, and also believed that I would one day serve in Congress. And I thought that she was just someone with an only child and who thought that the sun rose and set on her baby girl. So.
It has been said you are destined for the U.S. Senate. Is that true?
Oh, my goodness. I mean, I'm just following the work. That's it. And so far that has served me well in life. The work that I started on the Boston City Council in the micro, to be able to have that connective thread and now champion that work and do it deeper on a macro level federally. Because as I said, federal policy has really been the origin story for so many of our injustices. And so I'm just following the work. I've never obsessed on trajectory or title or position. And so far that's served me well. So I'm just head down, doing the movement building work and doing the legislative work.
Okay, we say this is the fun and games part of the program because we have 3 questions we ask everyone who's ever come to the Takeout microphone.
Okay.
Take these questions. They're not hard ones. They're enjoyable ones, in whichever order you prefer.
Okay.
I read them this way. Most influential book in your life and why? Okay. All-time favorite movie? And if you're on a long flight or a long drive and you're really going to enjoy some music, I mean really enjoy some music, what kind of artist or genre is it most likely to be?
Okay, I'll work backwards.
Almost everyone does. Okay,
I love Motown, anything Motown era, and R&B, definitely. More recently, and I'm a little embarrassed to admit this, but I'm not a good flyer. And so I've been researching every sort of tool that could support me. Yes, I do.
To Boston, for example?
No, I do fly.
You got to fly to Boston, right.
And so I've been listening to some opera. Now I couldn't name them, but I will tell you that I have been enjoying that. But my my heart lives with R&B. Okay, particularly 90s R&B.
Okay, very good.
And then as far as a book, there are many books that have shaped me. I'll lift two really quickly. One is one that I read every day. And as I said, I'm a woman of faith and grew up in my grandfather's storefront church on the south side of Chicago. And so I do read the President's Devotionals. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but I do. My husband and I, we use that for our prayer, reflection, and meditation every single day. And even though we have read it through, probably at this point, 6, 8, 10, 12 times, we still will go to the dates and read that affirmation, that spiritual reflection for the day. That was written by Joshua Du Bois, who was sort of a spiritual steward for President Obama. And so President's Devotionals, I read that every day. And then a book that was really game-changing for me is I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. I, as you said, I, had my share of troubles, particularly in my formative years, and one of them is that I'm a survivor. I'm a survivor of sexual abuse, and that book saved my life, and I do believe in the power of books to save lives, which is why I'm so dismayed by the bans that are happening throughout the country right now. But when I read I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou, that was the first time I knew, as a child who was being abused and carrying great shame about it, that that I wasn't alone. And so that is the power of books, I think, to stoke consciousness, inform consciousness, to create safe space, and to build community. And so that was when I knew I wasn't alone. Okay, so 90s R&B, President's Devotional, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings.
And movie. One of your favorite movies.
Okay, I'm going to take it. I have so many, it's hard.
Sure,
My husband and I
understood.
are big movie people. But actually, I'm going to take it way, way back. Have you ever seen a movie called The Imitation of Life?
No.
Okay, that's a very powerful movie. That's one. It's all about identity, and it's about a young woman who's passing. She's very light complexion, and she's passing as a white woman for most of her life, and it's very painful for her black mother. Lana Turner's in the movie.
Okay.
It's an incredible movie. So Imitation of Life, if we were to take it really way back. And then I do like a good, rom-com or romance movie. And so one movie my husband and I love and we rewatch together every Valentine's Day is a movie that was filmed in Chicago, and it's called Love Jones. And it starred Lorenz Tate and Nia Long.
Very good. Ayanna Pressley, representative of the 7th District of the
Yes.
Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It's been great to hang out with you. Thanks for joining us at Ben's
you.
Chili Bowl. Thanks for bringing our show to Ben's Chili Bowl, and we'll see you around Washington.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.